Outside the neon-lit nightclub, Zhong Luoxue paced, her heart churning like a restless tide. That brat, Zhong Yuning, dared to propose to me on my birthday. I'm his sister. He'll always be the little tagalong trailing behind me. Now, she didn't even dare go home. She scanned her surroundings, a nervous flutter in her chest. Would she encounter the legendary young master tonight? If she was lucky enough, she would hire him to be her fake boyfriend, putting an end to Yuning's unrealistic infatuation. Then everything could return to normal, and her heart could find peace. Suddenly, her gaze snagged on a figure emerging from the club. He strolled out leisurely, one hand tucked in his pocket. His face was sculpted and handsome, his eyes deep as the night sky. A straight nose, flawless skin. Every detail exuded a unique charm. Bingo! He's the one. Luoxue's fingers snapped. She started towards him. Gong Nan's headed for the parking lot. He registered the light footsteps behind him but didn't turn. His pace remained steady, unhurried, until he reached his car. Instead of opening the door, he pulled out a pack of cigarettes, expertly extracted one, and lit it. The tip glowed intermittently in the darkness. Luoxue stopped, frowning as she studied the man in front of the black SUV. How should she approach him? Just then, a figure sashayed past her. Luoxue froze as a flamboyantly dressed woman approached the man. "Hey, handsome, got a light?" she purred, flicking her hair and batting her eyelashes. The overpowering scent of perfume made Nan's frown. He glanced sideways, noticed Luoxue standing nearby, and tilted his chin. She asked first. The woman, surprised, turned to Luoxue. "Look, Auntie, I bet your kids are grown. Shouldn't you be home tucking them in?" she sneered. "Auntie?" Luoxue's inner volcano erupted, obliterating her original purpose. "Who are you calling Auntie? With your face like a mummy." Luoxue unleashed her sharp tongue. The woman's eyes widened in fury. Like an enraged lioness, she lunged at Luoxue, ready for a fight. Luoxue, not one to back down, engaged. The next moment, the air froze. Luoxue stared in disbelief as a large clump of hair came away in her hand. "Ah!" the woman shrieked, pain and rage mingling in her voice. "My hair!" she screamed, her eyes burning with fury. A male voice cut through the commotion. "Stop!" Two uniformed police officers strode towards them. Before Luoxue could react, the woman bolted. Luoxue hesitated for 3 seconds, then ran in the opposite direction. "Oof!" Luoxue clutched her forehead. The man from the SUV stood before her. "What do you want?" she snapped. Nans called out behind her, "Officer, she's over here." Luoxue whirled around to see a policeman approaching. She rolled her eyes. "Annoying," she muttered. As she was led away, Nans remained silent. "Captain Gong, what happened?" "Catfight," Nans said, glancing at the newcomer before turning back to his car. Lei Ming stared after him. Gong Nans, transferred to the Provincial Criminal Investigation Department a year ago, had become the city's youngest captain, renowned for his sharp intellect and decisive action in solving major cases. Tonight, he was supposed to meet an informant. Instead, he'd encountered 2 interesting women. He just settled into his car when Lei Ming's booming voice echoed, "Captain, Chief Zhou wants to see you." Nans frowned, rolling down the window. "What about?" "He didn't say," Lei Ming shrugged helplessly. "I'll go. You can get a cab back to HQ." Nans started the engine. "Huh." Lei Ming hesitated, then grinned. "Captain, it's late. Shouldn't we be off duty?" Nans raised an eyebrow. "Got something to do?" "Well," Lei Ming started, then thought better of it. "No, nothing, Captain. Go ahead. I'll head back and keep working." Everyone knew their captain enjoyed having them dance on his strings. Lei Ming had been on the receiving end more than once. In the interrogation room, name, age, occupation. 2 officers, a man and a woman, sat opposite Luoxue. The female officer addressed her. Luoxue stared blankly. How had she ended up in a police station? She was a law-abiding citizen. This was her first close encounter with the law. "What, huh?" "Answer the question." The officer frowned. Luoxue bit her lip, trying to stay calm. "Officer, what did you ask?" she said, wide-eyed. The male officer's lips twitched. He wasn't supposed to be involved in this interrogation, but a glimpse of a familiar figure on the surveillance footage had piqued his interest. The female officer's voice sharpened. "Don't play dumb. Behave yourself." Luoxue pressed her lips together and looked down. A knock interrupted the tense atmosphere. A male officer entered. "Chief Zhou, this is the other woman's statement." He handed Zhoubin a file and summarized the incident. Zhoubin scanned the document, then focused on Luoxue. "Tell me your side of the story." Seeing his calmer demeanor, Luoxue began. "Zhong Luoxue, 28, car saleswoman. This was a mutual assault. The other woman has injuries. It depends whether she wants to press charges," Zhoubin said, glancing at her. "Officer, she called me Annie, and she started it." Luoxue protested, her voice full of wrongness/feeling of being treated unjustly. Zhoubin raised an eyebrow. She called his female colleague officer sister, but him officer uncle? Was he that old? "You pulled out her hair," the female officer interjected. "It wasn't on purpose. I didn't know her hair was so fragile." Luoxue mumbled. "Call your family. Have them come down here," Zhoubin said. "Officer, can I not?" Luoxue pleaded. "No," the female officer replied. Leaving the room, Zhoubin saw Gong Nan standing outside, gazing through the window at the woman inside. "You know each other?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "No," Nans replied, meeting his gaze. "Then why was she following you?" Zhoubin pressed, clearly probing. "I don't know," Nan said flatly. "Don't tell me she's your secret admirer?" Zhoubin teased. Nan's lips curved into a rare smile, shedding his usual seriousness. "Why don't you investigate? Shouldn't be too difficult for a chief like you." "Should I?" Nan's expression turned serious. "Why did you call me here?" Zhoubin handed him the statement. "Her real name is Chung Meili. She's—" "That's it?" Nans frowned. "Yes, but the woman inside, Zhong Luoxue, doesn't know Chung Meili. Yet they got into a fight. A bit of a coincidence, don't you think? Or are they both excellent actresses?" Nans considered this, then handed the statement back. "Let her go." "What?" Zhoubin was taken aback. Nans glanced at him and walked away. He knew she wasn't involved. "Nansura, have you eaten? Want to grab something?" Zhoubin called after him. Nans stopped, realizing he hadn't eaten. "Sure," he replied. "Come to my office. I'll just give some instructions," Zhoubin said. "Okay." Nans headed towards the office. Meanwhile, Luoxue, relieved to be released, practically skipped out of the interrogation room. Reaching the main hall, she collided with a solid wall of muscle. "Watch where you're going," she exclaimed, clutching her forehead and looking up to glare at the culprit. It was the man who had helped the police catch her. What was he doing here? And this wasn't the first time they'd collided. It was because of him that she'd gotten into that fight with the other woman. Her anger flared. Nans frowned at her, irritated by the double collision and her accusatory tone. He sidestepped her and walked away. Luoxue grabbed his arm. "How dare you? You bump into someone and don't even apologize? Pretty face, but no manners. What kind of upbringing did you have?" Nan's face darkened. "Let go," he said, his voice hard, pulling his arm free. Luoxue held on tighter. "I don't know you. Why did you put that woman up to insulting me? You're birds of a feather. Who are you? What shady business are you up to? This is a police station." She was convinced he and the other woman were up to no good. "Let go. You'll regret it," Nans warned coldly. "You think you can threaten me?" Luoxue's fury boiled over. Dragging him towards the interrogation room, she yelled, "Officer, he's threatening me." Nan's anger finally snapped. He wrenched himself free, pushing her away. Luoxue fell, crying out, "He hit me! Help!" Heads popped out of offices, staring at the commotion in the hallway. "Captain Gong!" someone exclaimed, recognizing Nans. Luoxue looked up. An officer had addressed the man beside her. "He called you, Captain?" Nan's face hardened. "What do you think?" Luoxue's blood ran cold. She remembered her behavior. It wasn't my fault. You bumped into me, she whispered. Nans watched her sudden change in demeanor, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Captain, are you okay? Should we bring her back in? Someone asked. At the word interrogation, Luoxue plastered a smile on her face. Captain Gong, you're a big man. You wouldn't hold it against a little woman like me, would you? Nans leaned down, his voice a low murmur. What if I do? Luoxue's eyes widened. She couldn't speak. Zhobin emerged from his office, noticing the unusual atmosphere. He saw Nans and the recently released Luoxue standing together. His gaze darted between them. This? Nans began, but Luoxue cut him off. Officer, we were just joking. Sorry to disturb everyone. So sorry. She bowed deeply and scurried away like a rabbit. Zhobin watched her go, bewildered. What was that about? Nans chuckled. Interesting character. Luoxue fled the station, glancing over her shoulder until she was sure no one was following. Just as she relaxed, a hand tapped her shoulder. She screamed. Sis, what's wrong? It was Yuning. Luoxue clutched her chest. Yuning, you scared me to death. He studied her intently. After she calmed down, she asked, What are you doing here? I should be asking you that, he said, his voice edged with displeasure. How would I know? She retorted. 3 days. No calls. Not at work. Not at home. He said, his gaze piercing. Luoxue shifted uncomfortably. This boy, though not related by blood, was her only family. They were both orphans, adopted by a couple when she was 10 and he was 5. But their happiness was short-lived. 2 years later, the couple had their own child and turned against the siblings. When she turned 18, she took Yuning and left, determined to build a life for themselves. Now, they depended on each other. And somewhere, along the way, her little brother had developed inappropriate feelings for her. She couldn't blame him entirely. Perhaps she'd failed as a sister. Zhong Luoxue, wherever you hide, I'll find you. You'll always be mine. Yuning had been frantic. He'd searched everywhere. He'd almost reported her missing, but something held him back. He couldn't believe she'd disappear without reason, unless she was in danger. Seeing her run out of the police station, he'd rushed towards her. He couldn't lose her again. He wouldn't let her escape him. Luoxue's thoughts were a tangled mess. Yuning's image haunted her. She had to sever this emotional tie. Let's go home, Yuning said, reaching for her hand. No, I'm not going home with you, she backed away. Where will you go? He asked, his eyes filled with pain. Wherever you go, I'll go with you. Luoxue bit her lip. Across the street, Nans and Zhobin walked side by side. Let's eat at that restaurant. The food's good, Zhobin suggested. Okay, Nans agreed. Hearing their voices, Luoxue's eyes lit up. She darted forward and wrapped her arms around Nan's waist, clinging to him. Where have you been? I've been waiting, she said brightly. Nans froze. Zhobin gaped at them. Nans frowned, trying to dislodge her. Officer, help me. Luoxue pleaded, sensing his resistance. Nans glanced at Yuning, then back at her, a strange half-smile on his face. Officer, please, help me, she repeated desperately. If this failed, she'd have no excuse to refuse Yuning again. Yuning stalked towards them, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. Zhong Luoxue. Luoxue turned to him. Yuning, let me introduce you. This is my boyfriend, Gong. She trailed off, looking at Nans with a pleading expression. Nan's eyes flickered. A cynical smile touched his lips. Why should I help you? Luoxue tightened her grip on his waist, a nervous flutter in her stomach. Nans frowned, not from pain, but from an unexpected tingling sensation. Her small, soft hands against his firm body created a strange contrast that unsettled him. Yuning's face was grim. Your boyfriend? Yes, Nans answered for her. Yuning's gaze cut to Nans, then back to Luoxue. You disappeared for 3 days to find a boyfriend? Yuning, don't be rude. Luoxue scolded. You didn't even call me sister. She was grateful to Nans and wanted to use this opportunity to set Yuning straight. Yuning, she said sternly. You need to be sensible about relationships. You can't make rash decisions based on impulse. Gong and I. She stopped again. She didn't know his name. She couldn't call him Captain. What's wrong? Forgotten my name already? Nans leaned down, pinching her cheek. Call me Zay. Yuning stared at them, seeing the amusement in Nan's eyes. Luoxue looked away. We're dating now. Call him Brother Gong. Brother-in-law, Nans interjected. Yuning's fist shot towards Nan's face. Yuning, stop. Luoxue released Nans and jumped in front of him. Yuning's fist, already launched, hit her instead. Luoxue gasped, collapsing against Nans. Nans swiftly kicked Yuning, sending him sprawling. Are you okay? Let's go to the hospital, he said, his voice laced with concern. Luoxue shook her head, managing a weak smile. Captain Gong, I'm sorry to drag you into this. Nans glanced at Yuning, whose face was contorted in rage. Maybe we should try this, Nans murmured, looking down at Luoxue, a strange resolve in his eyes. Luoxue stared at him, confused. Your brother. He's out of control. Who knows what he'll do next? Nans sighed. Luoxue bit her lip. She understood. Yuning wouldn't intentionally hurt her, but a man driven to extremes. Captain Gong, I owe you another one, she said, a trace of sadness in her voice. Just remember that, Nans said, scooping her into his arms and carrying her towards the building. Yuning's actions had pushed his sister further away, right into the arms of another man. And Captain Gong, after 30 years of singlehood, found himself in a relationship. Their fates had intertwined. From then on, Nans drove Luoxue to and from work. One day, as she approached his car, she leaned on the window. Captain, you don't have to do this every day. Get in. What do you want for dinner? He asked, a smile playing on his lips. You choose. I'll cook, she said, sliding into the passenger seat. You can cook? He raised an eyebrow. Not everything, but I make a mean home-cooked meal, she replied. Then make your specialty, he said, looking at her. Okay. As Nans savored the meal, warmth spread through him. The familiar taste of home cooking evoked a sense of belonging he hadn't felt since his parents died when he was 15. After dinner, as he was leaving, he hesitated, looking at her. What is it? She asked. Nothing. I'll go now. Get some rest. Okay. Luoxue didn't see him again for 3 months. A quiet disappointment settled in her heart. Yuning tried to see her a few times, but she avoided him. One day, returning home, she heard a noise from the kitchen. She froze. Cautiously, she approached. A tall figure was busy chopping vegetables. Warmth flooded her. She walked over and took the knife from Nans. Captain, that's not how you chop vegetables. He watched her deft movements, a smile softening his face. Then, his arm slipped around her waist. Luoxue, be my girlfriend, he murmured. She paused, her hand stilling. For real. For real, he said softly. She put down the knife and turned to face him. Don't disappear again without telling me, okay? Okay, he promised. He had been about to tell her he was leaving for a mission, but he didn't know how. In the past 3 months, he realized she had become indispensable to him. He lowered his head and kissed her. She wrapped her arms around his neck, returning the kiss. Their love blossomed. A year later, they married. Elsewhere, Yuning sat behind bars, watching the sunrise. He'd stormed their wedding with a knife, terrifying the guests, before being apprehended by the police present. He had lost his sister forever,